The Serengeti ecosystem represents one of the most complex and dynamic biological theaters on the planet. As the nocturnal shift concludes, the cool, blue-hued pre-dawn chill settles over the isolated acacia woodlands, bringing a brief, deceptive calm. Apex predators, such as the leopard, Panthera pardus, rely heavily on this transitionary light. Their incredible arboreal agility allows them to cache prey high above the reach of terrestrial scavengers. The dense rosettes on their coats act as perfect disruptive camouflage against the gnarled bark and lingering morning mist, rendering them nearly invisible until they choose to move. Simultaneously, the African civet, Civetictis civetta, utilizes these final hours of darkness. This solitary, highly secretive mammal relies on olfactory prowess rather than sight, rooting through the underbrush for invertebrates before the heat of the day forces it into deep cover. Out on the open, short-grass plains, the bat-eared fox, Otacyon megalatus, demonstrates a fascinating acoustic adaptation. Their disproportionately large ears serve a dual purpose: thermoregulation in the intense heat, and highly sensitive radar-like capabilities to detect the subterranean movements of harvester termites. As the first warm rays of sunrise break the horizon, avian life reclaims the soundscape. The lilac-breasted roller, Coracias caudatus, takes to the dead acacia stumps. Their vibrant pastel plumage is not merely decorative. It plays a crucial role in intricate aerial courtship displays. In the fever tree groves lining the dry riverbeds, complex social structures awaken. Troops of olive baboons, Papio anubis, descend to forage. Their survival is entirely dependent on rigid hierarchies and constant, hyper-vigilant communication to detect encroaching predators. The rising sun initiates a massive thermal shift, kicking up the golden dust particles that define the dry season savanna. Striding through this dust is the secretary bird, Sagittarius serpentarius. This highly specialized raptor has evolved long crane-like legs to stomp venomous snakes and large insects with lethal, focused force. Beneath the feet of the massive herbivores, microecologies thrive. The superb starling, Lamprotornis superbus, utilizes the disturbance caused by the grazing herds, darting quickly to snap up insects flushed from the sun-baked earth. The true scale of the Serengeti is defined by its colossal migrating herds. Plains zebras, Equus quagga, move collectively. Their high-contrast stripes are a marvel of evolutionary engineering, creating optical illusions in the shimmering heat that confuse biting tsetse flies and disrupt the targeting of stalking lions. Mixed within these herds are the smaller, highly reactive herbivores like Thompson's gazelle, Eudorcus thomsoni. Their survival strategy hinges on immense speed and explosive changes in direction, requiring them to exist in a permanent state of high-alert nervous energy. Towering above the dust, the Maasai giraffe, Giraffa camelopardalis tippleskirchi, acts as a biological bridge between the earth and the canopy. Their cardiovascular systems are incredibly robust, pumping blood up long necks to prehensile tongues perfectly adapted to stripping leaves from heavily armored, thorny acacia branches. By mid-morning, the heat begins to assert its dominance over the plains. The ostrich, Struthio camelus, the world's largest bird, utilizes its massive muscular legs not just for incredible sprinting speeds, but to cover vast distances across the sparse, resource-poor scrub. Similarly adapted to this open environment is the Kori bustard, Ardeatus kori. As the heaviest flying bird in Africa, it spends most of its time firmly on the ground, stalking with a measured, regal pace to snatch large grasshoppers driven out by the heat. At ground level, the warthog, Phacocoerus africanus, injects robust energy into the scene. They drop to calloused knees, using their reinforced snouts and curved ivory tusks to violently excavate nutrient-dense roots from the increasingly hard, dry soil. Survival here often depends on numbers. The banded mongoose, Mungo's mungo, operates in highly coordinated manic packs. They employ a complex system of vocalizations and sentinels, individuals standing bolt upright on their hind legs to scan the horizon while the rest of the pack furiously excavates insect mounds. The true engineers of this landscape, however, are the African elephants, Loxodonta africana. These matriarchal herds manipulate the ecosystem itself, uprooting trees, digging for deep water, and using their trunks to blast cooling red dust over their thick, deeply wrinkled hides to combat the rising temperatures and relentless parasites. As the sun reaches its zenith, the environment becomes hostile. The cheetah, Acinonyx jubatus, the planet's fastest land predator, must act before the heat becomes unbearable. They rely on the fading morning shadows and the low cover of the yellow grass, moving with calculated fluidity to stalk prey before initiating an explosive, metabolically taxing sprint. Their primary targets, such as Grant's gazelles, Nanger granti, become hyper-vigilant. As optical heat waves distort the horizon, visual cues become unreliable, forcing these gazelles to rely heavily on scent and the slightest auditory disturbances to avoid the stalkers. Larger, medium-sized herbivores like the impala, Apeiceros melampus, abandon the open plains entirely during this time. They seek the dappled shade of the acacia woodlands, their sleek reddish-brown coats blending into the shadows as they frantically groom and flick their tails to ward off the oppressive swarms of biting flies. Even the opportunistic scavengers feel the strain. The black-backed jackal, Lupulella mesomelas, trots persistently behind the herds. With their tongues lolling out and chests heaving in rapid, rhythmic pants, they scour the sun-baked earth for any scraps left behind, enduring the intense heat through sheer endurance. Standing seemingly impervious to the heat wave distortion is the hartebeest, Alcelaphus bucelaphus. Their bizarre, elongated facial structure and complex pedicle horns make them easily identifiable as they stand statue still on dry ridges, acting as sentinels while slowly grinding their cud. By early afternoon, the apex predators are largely incapacitated by the sun. The lion pride, Panthera leo, seeks the deepest, harshest shade available beneath solitary acacias. They lie completely flat, panting heavily and swatting lazily at flies, entering a state of deep lethargy to conserve their explosive energy reserves for the cooling dusk. In stark contrast, the Cape buffalo, Synchorus kaffir, face the heat head-on. These massive, formidable bovines cluster tightly together in enormous herds, relying on thick coatings of dried mud and the symbiotic relationship with oxpeckers to survive the brutal midday sun and relentless insects. The giant eland, Torotragus oryx, the largest antelope in Africa, also demonstrates incredible heat tolerance. Their immense bulk and physiological adaptations allow them to stand stoically out in the open shimmer, methodically browsing thorny bushes when most other species seek shelter. Commanding the high ground, the topi, Damaliscus lunatus gemella, utilize baked red termite mounds as lookout posts. Their iridescent, purple-brown coats catch the harsh sun as they stand defiantly, their elongated faces scanning the distorted horizon, playing a crucial role as the savannah's early warning system. Deep within the parched earth, the spotted hyena, Crocuta crocuta, seeks out the few remaining shallow mud wallows. These highly intelligent ultimate survivors roll their massive shoulders into the cooling mud, panting heavily to regulate their core temperature before their reign of nocturnal dominance begins. As the intense heat finally begins to break, the late afternoon shadows stretch long across the plains. High above, the martial eagle, Polymatus bellicosus, rides the last thermal updrafts. This apex aerial predator scans the sprawling ecosystem with incredibly acute binocular vision, preparing for a late-day strike. Cruising much lower is the battler eagle, Terathopius ecaudatus. Easily recognized by its short tail and acrobatic side-to-side balancing flight, this raptor scours the rocky outcrops and dry brush for reptiles becoming active in the cooling air. On the ground, the drop in temperature triggers the awakening of the African wild dog, Lycaon pictus. These highly social, incredibly efficient hunters reinforce their complex pack dynamics through intense, excited greeting rituals, furiously licking muzzles before initiating their coordinated evening hunt. At a micro level, the dwarf mongoose, Helogale parvula, scurries frantically around the towering bases of termite mounds. Africa's smallest carnivore must gather the last of the day's insects, constantly relying on sentinels to watch for the encroaching shadows of twilight predators. Moving with absolute fearlessness across the rugged scrubland is the honey badger, Mellivora capensis. Notoriously aggressive and protected by incredibly loose, thick skin, they dig violently into the rocky earth with massive claws, completely unbothered by the growing darkness. Emerging from the dense, thorny thickets is the elusive black rhinoceros, Diceros bicornis. This solitary heavyweight uses its prehensile lip to selectively browse on tough acacia branches, its highly developed hearing and sense of smell compensating for its relatively poor eyesight. As the sky shifts toward dusk, the scavengers arrive to claim what the sun has left behind. The massive lappet-faced vulture, Torgos tracheliotos, dominates carcasses through sheer intimidation. Their terrifyingly large hooked beaks are capable of tearing through tough hide and sinew that other birds cannot penetrate. Waiting patiently at the periphery are the marabou storks, Leptoptilos crumenifer. These unsettling, towering birds stand like sentinels in the fading light, using their massive wedge-shaped bills to snatch and swallow large scraps of bone and meat whole. Providing a burst of erratic energy in the shadows is the yellow-billed hornbill, Tachus flavirostris. Known for their undulating flight, they hop awkwardly on the ground, using their comically large beaks to toss dry leaves and unearth invertebrates. Moving at an entirely different ancient pace is the leopard tortoise, Stigmocheles pardalis. Protected by a highly domed, geometrically patterned carapace, they drag their heavy shells across the dirt, seeking succulent leaves before the temperature drops too drastically. In the fever trees lining the riverbanks, troops of vervet monkeys, Chlorocebus pygyrithris, engage in their final foraging runs. Their sharp black faces and white fringes are highly expressive as they socialize, constantly scanning the encroaching shadows for leopards and other twilight threats. As twilight firmly takes hold, the crepuscular specialists emerge. The caracal utilizes the muted golden hues and tall grass to stalk perfectly silently, relying on its extraordinary black-tufted ears and powerful hind legs to launch massive vertical leaps to swat birds from the air. Deep within the marsh grass, the serval, Leptalurus serval, hunts entirely by sound. With disproportionately long legs and radar-like ears, they freeze motionless, pinpointing the subterranean movements of rodents before executing a highly specialized downward pounce. High in the darkening canopy, the common genet, Genetta genetta, moves with fluid, serpentine grace. Their long banded tails act as perfect counterweights as they climb headfirst down trunks, their massive eyes dilating to hunt insects in the near-total darkness. The acoustic signature of the African twilight is often the deep, resonant booming of the southern ground hornbill, Bucorvis ledbeateri. These imposing birds march in synchronized family groups, inflating vivid red throat pouches to project sub-bass calls that echo for miles across the cooling plains. The focus of the entire ecosystem now shifts inevitably toward the water. The piercing shriek of the African fish eagle, Haliaeetus vocifer, rings out over the muddy, treacherous banks of the Mara River, signaling the tension that defines this critical boundary. In the reed-lined shallows, waterbucks, Cobus ellipsoprimnus, graze nervously. These shaggy, coarse-haired herbivores often use the water as a refuge from terrestrial predators, constantly testing the wind with their wet black noses. However, the water holds its own terrors. The Hippopotamus amphibius, becomes highly active and aggressive as dusk falls. Massive pods jostle in the churning brown river, dominant males displaying terrifying ivory-tusked yawns before they prepare to leave the water and graze under the cover of night. Slithering along the slippery, root-choked mud banks is the Nile monitor, Varanus niloticus. This heavy, opportunistic lizard utilizes its long, blue-forked tongue to taste the air, weaving seamlessly between land and water to scavenge anything left behind by the apex predators. Hidden entirely within the dense riverside vegetation is the African rock python, Python seabay. This massive constrictor gathers its heavy, muscular coils into a tense ambush position, using heat sensing, pits along its jawline to detect approaching mammals in the fading light. Gliding with terrifying speed over the rocky debris above the river is the black mamba, Dendroaspis polylepis. Highly venomous and incredibly fast, it raises the front third of its body to survey the banks, flashing the pitch-black interior of its mouth as a deadly warning to anything that approaches. As the sky turns a deep blood red, the tension at the river's edge peaks. A tiny red-headed agama, clinging to a sun-warmed boulder, senses the vibrations first. Its throat pulses rapidly as the sheer volume of the approaching herds causes the earth to tremble. Standing statue still in the flowing shallows, a towering Goliath heron, Ardea goliath, ignores the growing chaos. It waits with terrifying patience before uncoiling its neck with lightning speed, plunging its spear-like beak into the red water to secure a final meal. Then the dam breaks. The Great Migration arrives at the sheer, crumbling cliffs of the Mara. Driven by sheer biological imperative, thousands of blue wildebeest, Conocades taurinus, surge forward. Panic takes hold as they slide uncontrollably down the muddy embankments, launching themselves violently into the churning water. And waiting beneath the foam are the ultimate prehistoric survivors, the Nile crocodiles, Crocodilus niloticus. The river explodes as colossal reptiles launch their ambush, their massive bone-crushing jaws slamming shut as the wildebeest leap frantically in a desperate, chaotic bid for survival. This is the raw, untamed reality of the Serengeti. The Great Migration across the Mara River is not just a localized event. It is a critical pulse in the lifeblood of the entire ecosystem. The influx of biomass sustains the colossal Nile crocodiles for months, while the carcasses left behind feed the vultures, storks, and countless aquatic scavengers. Even the nutrients released into the water column support the intricate web of life, from microscopic organisms to the massive arapaima. As the dust settles and the blood-red twilight deepens into night, the Serengeti ecosystem prepares for the nocturnal shift. The survivors of the crossing continue their relentless journey, driven by ancient instincts and the promise of fresh grazing lands. This continuous cycle of life, death, and renewal underscores the profound interconnectivity of all species within this awe-inspiring and untamed reality.